Hello and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Side Talks 2.0. As always, my name is Dr. Jack Saxenian. Today I have a very unique and exciting guest for us to talk about the impact of the pandemic on education, what it means in terms of getting into college, the anxiety and the uncertainty associated with the whole education system for the short term and going forward in the long term. What are the issues that we have to deal with? What are the issues we have been dealing with? And how does this impact education on a broader scale? So we've been discussing a lot about the pandemic from a medical perspective with physicians and scientists and dealing with the medical component. But I think it's also very crucial to look at how this will affect education. And therefore, today I have a guest, Daniel Mehrabian, who is very much in tune with all of this, and I will let himself introduce what he does. And we'll be having sort of an informal discussion to figure out what is known, what we have to expect, and what impact does the pandemic and the lockdown have on our education system. So with that, Daniel, please, can you give us a quick background about yourself, what you do, why I have invited you on my show, and we can start from there and kind of open up the discussion about education.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dr. Jack, for having me. I've viewed your shows and I value your expertise and your commitment to the field of medicine and your selflessness in giving of your expertise to the community and educating all of us. So I really appreciate your voice and what you've shared with us in helping us navigate this uncertain time. Again, my name is Daniel Mehrabian, and I am the founder and CEO of an educational consulting company based in Greater LA. And I've been in the field of college consulting for over 15 years. I've helped numerous students and families navigate the college admissions process and and matriculate into some of the top universities, both in the state of California, in the U.S., and also different parts of the world. And so I've been in tune with the field of in the field of education, with everything that's going on. And you're right, obviously the virus, the COVID situation has impacted all of society, and education being one of those sectors or one of those aspects of society that is a foundational aspect of society. It has really had a big impact on students, parents, staff, teachers, professors, and the whole thing. So so thank you for having me, Dr. Jack. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you with your kind words and agreeing to come on here. So I do have a few questions that, in speaking to some of my colleagues and family members who have kids ready to go to college, and unfortunately many of them missed their high school graduation, college graduation, so it's really tough. But let's start off with students that are getting ready, the seniors, for example, in high school, since this is something that you're an expert on. So we'll start from there and then kind of away. So with all of this uncertainty about schools starting, when they're going to start, what is going to happen in terms of the processes of opening up the schools, how does that impact the students in terms of applying to colleges right now? And you could correct me if I'm wrong, but at least I know California, in reading, I think it was your post that got rid of standardized exams for this year for the admissions process. So can you touch a little bit about that, and what are some of the things that are being put in place to fix these problems, at least short term and maybe long term?
Yes, yes, that's a great question. So it definitely is impacting the students who are going to apply as rising seniors for the class of 2021. And because of the virus, the College Board, which is the parent company which houses the SAT, decided to it was limited in terms of testing sites, facilities for students. So basically, all the tests for the spring and the summer were canceled. And because of that, the universities reacted and said, well, it's not going to be fair for us to expect students to produce SAT tests because of this, of the cancellations of a lot of the exams. So recently, what happened was that the UCs, as a system of 9 universities in the state of California, decided to make it optional for the class of 2021 and 2022. And they decided to extend that. The regents, the UC regents, decided to extend the moratorium, or decided to extend and become test blind for the class of 2023 and 2024. And they were also saying that they don't feel like the SAT is a good indicator of future college success. So the UCs are trying to come up with an alternate exam assessment in order to test the students that apply to the UC system. So these are all the different conversations that are going on in the field at this time. Now, that's the aspect of testing. Of course, because of COVID, a lot of the campuses in the fall are going to be, are still deciding, actually, are still thinking about how they're going to operate. But we know that the Cal States, which is the other state school in state system in the state of California, which has 23 campuses, the Cal States are going to be are going to be online for the fall of this year. So that's what we're looking at this time. In terms of the high schools, so summer sessions, obviously starting March, when the pandemic really started taking, becoming more and more, prolonged, we closed down, the schools closed down, and everybody had to quickly convert to online learning. And that produced a lot of challenges, not only for the staff, but also for the parents, because the parents became the primary instructors at home for their students. And then they were also, of course, working. You had parents who had to work and also become the primary instructors for their students. And then some of the schools had difficulty transitioning into an online system. This happened within a matter of a few days. And it really affected larger public school systems, such as LAUSD, which is the big one here. It's the second biggest school district in the country. But it impacted LAUSD more so because they didn't have the infrastructure to be able to transition from sit-in person to person to online. So a lot of the kids, lost out in terms of their education because the instructional time.
A couple of quick questions, just so that I don't forget. One of them is, not to dwell on it too much, but you said the SATs are optional now for this year's applying, right? But generally, I know students at that point, nothing is technically optional for them because they always want to up one another.
Right.
And so when you say it's optional, does that mean they're going to consider the test? If you're not considering the test, well, why call it optional? But if somebody takes it and they do well, does that give them an advantage? And given the limited testing centers, I mean, you're
And
essentially creating more anxiety in kids for them to be able to figure out a place to take it. You know, some people might be able to afford to fly another state and take the exam, where other people can't afford that. So I think it creates a lot of issues there. And the second question I had, kind of similar to that, is we switched to this online testing, but online education. But correct me if I'm wrong, that requires a computer, right? And so the
yes, of course.
baseline assumption is everybody has a computer at home, which could be assumed to be true, but we know that's not always the case, right? So were
Right.
there issues related with that about people not being able to access? And then it's not like the libraries were open where you could go and use a library computer. So what do you know what were the issues and how that got resolved potentially?
Yes, yes. So that's a great point. I'll address the SAT situation for now, the first question that you had. Even though it's considered test optional, it's you I advise as a consultant, as a counselor, I advise my students to take it. And the reason is because it's going to provide an objective means by which the universities to be able to distinguish between one candidate over the other.
Sure.
So even though they're not required, they can still submit it, and it's still going to be looked at as part of the admissions
Mhm.
process. So there are going to be tests. They're going to start from August and occur every month until the month of December of this year. So there is going to be about 4 or 5 exams. And now the College Board is kind of scrambling to have different, more testing sites open up because because of the social distancing that
Right.
is mandatory now, and you can't have as many students in a location as you would if you were testing before the whole thing happened. So they're going to be, in order to compensate for that, they're going to have more sites so they can spread out the kids more in order
Sorry, but
for this to be able to take the exam.
yeah, what about like doing it virtually? In other words, like you have one person, um, a proctor kind of, you log in with Zoom, you're taking the exam while the proctor is watching you as you take the exam. So you could
Right.
technically do it from home, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. As a matter of fact, the College Board just released a statement of why they're not going to do it online. And the
Uh,
reason they indicated that is because they said they cannot trust that the students have a high, a good working internet for 3.5 hours to be able to do it, to take the exam. And that's literally what they said, you know?
well, but they're assuming like all students have computers at home to be able to, do online online studies,
Absolutely.
right?
I
So
mean, that's a good point that you bring up. Is there's an underlying presupposition that students already have access to a computer, and that's one of the challenges. But the technical reason was that they couldn't trust that the student would have
mhm,
an internet capability to sit down and take a test for 3.5 hours. And number two, with regards to a proctor, I mean, that I would imagine that would be a staffing nightmare for College Board to be able to provide a staff member for each student that takes the exam. So that's kind of like out of the question in terms of proctoring. Uh, but then what about the challenges in terms of cheating, right?
mhm,
If a student is taking it online at home, and this is the challenge they had with the AP exams,
mhm.
is even though you can lock the screen where the student can't go from one site to another on a device, but it potentially did not defend from students using multiple devices to get the answer to their tests. So they could pull up another iPad or another telephone and kind of start copying or getting the information from the other devices.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of it's crazy. It's
Right, right.
everybody's trying to navigate the process, and there's so many things that are coming out now. So
Makes sense. I mean, and you know, we've never been in this situation, and I know the kids are already anxiety levels is high. They've been staying home away from friends, and now they got to apply to college, and then all these new ways of doing the exam. And I feel for them. I really truly feel for them. So then, what about the second issue of computers and how did the online learning get kind of?
Well, yes, that's good. Yeah, that's good. So LA Unified had a terrible time with this issue with computers
Uh-huh.
because it serves so many thousands of students
Mhm.
that it took a long time. And it wasn't only LA Unified. Governor Newsom in his briefings addressed this issue specifically about technology in the state of California in terms of multiple districts within all over the state of California, both Northern California and Southern California, had
Mhm.
a problem giving families who either don't have it or could not afford it the capability to communicate with their teachers because the onus was on the district to provide the device and they didn't have as many. So they were asking for donations from private companies
Oh,
in
wow.
order to, in order to ratchet up that number where they
Mhm.
could provide it for some of the bigger districts or some districts in the state that did not have the capability to provide that for each family. So that was one of the major concerns that we learned about in this pandemic was the lack of technology for a lot of families, which
Wow.
made it really difficult for them.
Well, I mean, you know, of course, the virus is the cause of all of this, and everybody's thinking about it. But then, you know, unless there's people like you who are directly involved with this process, most people are not even thinking about these issues that are going to create stress in the family and dynamics and the added effects on the mental health, which is a different topic that hopefully we'll be able to discuss with some psychologists later. But what do you think is the short-term consequence of all this in terms of the education quality? And do you think this would force people to change the whole education system the way it's done
Mm,
and moving forward? Because sometimes, you know, with the pandemic, it might be a good time to say, you know what, let's hit the reset button because we're gonna do things new ways. So might as well start off with all these concepts we had, but we never put them into place because the old system was kind of working.
right, right. I think this is gonna send shockwaves to education as broadly speaking, because everybody is now being forced to rethink
Mhm.
how education is done. With the rules that the CDC is implementing or the guidelines that they're providing the states. They're basically telling the states that there needs to be the social distancing, for instance. For example, if you have a class of 40 students, now if you are putting a radius of 6 feet around each student, maybe you're now doing those down to about 15 to 20 students per classroom.
And they were
So
already full and cramped up in most of the districts that I've been hearing, you know, during normal times. So I can imagine this amplifies that tremendously.
this amplifies it tremendously. Um, and then what about another issue is the comfort level of the families,
Mhm.
wanting to send their kids back. What if they're not comfortable enough to send their kids back
Mhm.
to school? Are the schools equipped to be able to provide an alternate medium of education
Mhm.
for the families in terms of either a hybrid education or a fully online education? And logistically, it impacts the school in terms of are they going to have alternate days that the students go to school? Are they going to do a morning shift and an afternoon shift.
Mhm.
So these are the questions that are running through the mind of administrators in all the schools, in terms of how
Yeah.
they're going to take those CDC guidelines. For instance, at our school, uh, teachers are going to be asked to wear a mask, you know. Now, you can't really teach with a mask on. I mean, it's going to make it really hard to teach. So what we're coming up with is a face shield that the teacher is going to use in order to
I see.
teach, and in order for the student to be able to see the teacher, see the affect, see the face,
Important facial cues, yes.
I mean, think about it. Just right now, when you're talking to someone who has a mask on, it's like they're half communicating with you. It's like,
For
what are
sure.
they saying? It's not even the same person. I mean,
Right.
so these are really amplified in terms of schools, because
Mhm.
you have the social distancing, you have the teachers that have to wear a mask,
So students
and
will, I'm sorry, students will not be required to wear masks?
well, they're saying that younger students are not going to be required to wear a mask, but older students are going to be asked, or recommended guideline is for them to wear a mask.
Well, I mean,
Now,
sorry, because that's kind of counterintuitive, because we know in general the younger population is not as affected. So it's about protecting the teacher, not
right.
necessarily the student. So if the teacher is wearing the shield, but nobody else is, then that's just saying like you're protecting the students, not the teacher.
Right. Well, I mean, you're the expert, medical expert. Is it possible that the thinking is that the teacher can pass it along to the student, and the student can take it home and pass it along to older people in the family?
Well, what I'm saying is, if you're
Is that
gonna
a
require face shield for teachers, it should be also equally required, because the same thing could happen
right?
between students not coming from the teacher but coming from their classmate, get an infection, and then they go home and
Right.
infect
Right.
grandpa and grandma, right? So I think, um, and also, like, with the social distancing, I mean, would that happen during PE time? Would there be PE, or I mean, are you not going to have uh, athletic games? Like, you're not going to play basketball during PE, or during lunchtime kids are not going to congregate together and socialize? Because to me, I think in addition to the education that they get, the interaction and that social interaction is really important for their overall
Sure.
development, right? And we're kind of, you know, stunting that in some ways, I think. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely right. The social interaction is an integral part of the development of a student, both cognitively, emotionally, socially, and in many other ways. So what the schools want to do is, for example, they want to go away from the cafeteria concept.
Mhm.
So they want to ask the kids to bring lunch from home to school. So they don't want, at least this is a model that has been proposed. For example, to have smaller assemblies. When we went to school, we had assemblies and pep rallies and all these things.
Right.
So they want to decrease the number of kids and separate them as much as possible when they go to assemblies.
Hmm.
So more frequency with less people participating. And then some other suggestions that I've heard is to, the effect on sports, in terms of social distancing again. And then I've also heard that they want to do the whole temperature check when kids come to school, both staff and students,
Wow.
to see if they're okay to be there.
Mhm.
And then also want to talk about field trips.
Right.
So they're kind of decreasing that, or they
Mhm.
they are canceling those, or they're thinking about not doing those as much as before.
Which was, you know,
So all
the, the stuff that kids look forward to. I know, those were the best days, because you got away from school, you got to hang out with your friends, doing stuff. So I
Right.
think those are important, and to take these away, you're removing experiences from kids. And I understand the logic, but how would this impact, um,
You know,
kids? It's something that needs to be openly discussed, and we can't just find a solution and say, well, this is the most comfortable for all of us involved, administrator, teachers, and not worry.
well, the way I think about it is because this is new to us, we don't know what we kind of don't have a hindsight. We don't know how to predict because we don't have
Sure.
any empirical data to go by.
Mm.
So what's going to happen is I think there are going to be a diversity of strategies that are going to be implemented in various districts, both public and private schools, and in different regions. And then once we have enough data to draw conclusions as to the efficacy of one model or strategy over the other, and then we can possibly make a model, right, for the rest of the schools to follow. So in terms of the effect, I personally, intuitively, it has to be an adverse effect.
Mm.
When, as you correctly said, when you take these important activities away from students, then I don't see it having a positive effect on them because it's such a crucial part of their development. So you know, I'll tell you this: I've had students that have come to school to clean up their um, their locker rooms, and one after another has voiced their concern of how much they miss being at school, how much they miss
Right.
being with their friends, how much alone they feel at
Mhm.
home, not being able to go out with their friends or go see a movie
For
or
sure.
visit one another. So anecdotally speaking, I'm seeing one case after another of students saying the same thing, that it
Mm.
has a negative effect. It has an adverse effect on their emotionally. It doesn't have a good
Mm.
effect. And it's really sad to hear this. I'm really
Yeah.
saddened by this. So it's tough. Yeah.
And so, do you know, in terms of the body of organizations that are involved in decision making, what kind of professions are asked to give their inputs in making some of these decisions?
Yes. So we get so the marching orders come from the Center of Disease Control, right? The CDC, in terms of nationally,
Yeah, but
and
I
and
feel
those
like
are
they're I don't want to say too much, but they're a little bit too removed and distant from.
right. What I was going to say is the CDC gives the quote unquote guidelines to the states, and then the way the chain works is the state education department
Mhm.
um, uh, gives guidelines and looks at how, given the scientific and the medical conditions on the ground in that state, and
Mhm.
they decide whether to increase the restrictions or decrease the restrictions based on the national guidelines. And then after the state, you have the counties
Right.
who give the guide, who have their own restrictions or their guidelines, and the districts and the private schools within the perimeter within the county
Mhm.
have to abide with the county guidelines. And then if there is some leeway, then there's more freedom to use a kind of a divergent or different models in terms of the leeway that's given by the county.
So in all of this, has anybody even thought about asking students like, hey, what do you think if we did X, Y, and Z? You guys are going to be the people affected by it, right? Do like are their inputs actually being considered at all? And I'm just throwing
That's
that as
that's
a.
a great question, and yes, the answer to your question is yes. So in our school, we have different committees that are set up right now, and one of the committees is made up of students. Another committee is made out of parents. Another committee is made out of staff members and other stakeholders in the community. So there's, I work at a private school now. So at our school, there are different stakeholders that are part of committees that are having impact, that are having input
Mhm.
with our administration. So our head of school is communicating with
Okay.
all of these different stakeholders in terms of what they feel about what's going on. So yes, there's definitely communication across the board.
That's
Yeah.
that's encouraging to hear because
Yeah.
the people being affected, the kids, they're already, we discussed they're in mentally like difficult situation, and then to have this new thing pushed on them without their opinions being asked, especially in some of the older high schooler, might feel like, hey, you're imposing something that's already affecting us. So as long as their voices are being heard, I think that's a good start. Um,
Yes, absolutely.
and so how does it impact getting into college now in terms of the actual process? How are they going to select what colleges they want to go to? Because I know most students would go on visit days or be able to visit the campus and get a feel for what it is. Some would spend some time at that campus. So that's from a student's perspective. And from the college admissions point of view, like the board, how are they going to pick and choose um, students if, like, for example, the SAT is something that you know is not going to be as required, so that objective measure is gone? And also, if different schools have different teaching, how do you kind of normalize that to know everybody's getting the same kind of opportunities to be learning the same thing?
Yeah. So the process is the same. So there are three main components to admissions. There is the testing component. There is the curriculum. There are the grades, and there is the extracurricular components. So those are three components in the college admissions process. Uh, the one that's been impacted now is the testing component. So a lot of universities are going the test optional route now. So what that does is it puts more of a weight on the grades and the student
Mhm,
performance in school,
mhm,
and also it puts more weight on the community involvement and
mhm.
the extracurricular involvement that the student has.
But
Uh,
isn't that also being impacted? Because if you're, because of the lockdown and social distancing, some of those extracurricular stuff are not happening, right?
right, right. So here's the challenge again. You open up another Pandora box, right?
Mhm.
Um, because of the decreased amount of opportunities now that students have. Formerly, my students, let's say I had a student, a Stanford student from the past year. He did 3 years of lab research at a university. In preparation
Mhm.
that doesn't exist now. Or another community in our vicinity is the Armenian Engineers and Scientists of America, right? AESA.
Right. Mhm.
They have a lot of kind of STEM,
Mhm.
science, engineering, math, technology, um, related activities and profession, development opportunities for students. So now that's being taken away from the students. So a lot of universities have summer programs. As you may know, Caltech, USC, UCLA,
Mhm.
Stanford, Ivy League universities, Yale,
Mhm. Mhm.
Princeton, all these schools, University of Chicago. So all these schools have summer programs where students fly out for 2 to 3 weeks for intensive programs, immersion programs in different
Right.
in different areas, like medicine, entrepreneurship, business, law, whatever it may be. But
Mhm.
now those are being taken away. So we've been crushed by that. I mean, we're trying to rethink the model of how we're gonna help strategize and have our students participate in extracurricular activities. I just want to finally say that there are a lot of alternate models that are popping up. There are virtual models. There are virtual programs.
Yeah.
So whatever they're going to be, they would have experienced on a college campus is now going to be done with, virtually with a professor and their peers,
Mhm.
in a virtual format. So,
But but um, but maybe if we look at, I mean, playing the devil's advocate here, maybe part of the problem why we're facing so many problems now is because we're asking kids to do too much before they start college or graduate high school, right? Maybe this tells us, you know what, like some of these things, it's okay not to have done them. We keep raising the bar and bar, and I know that already creates anxiety. And sometimes
mm,
kids might want to do these extracurricular stuff not because they're enjoying it, but they know if they don't, they're a little bit going to be falling behind from
that's
their
right.
peers in terms of going into college. Maybe this is a time where we reassess of what exactly is considered extracurricular when most stuff is not done because the student enjoys it, but they know they have to do something, play the violin or do the research or go to these things. Otherwise, they're not going to have a competitive advantage to get into college. Maybe it's time to kind of cut back on those things and say, hey, focus on your high school, your grades, your learning, the mental development during that time, kind of take away some of that stress and anxiety from kids. What's your opinion on that?
Oh, yeah, I've been concerned for many years about this, Jack, because I've seen the effect on the psychology of the student in terms of the competitiveness. We've become such a competitive society, and we've put so much weight and so much burden on our students. And you're right. This could be that maybe there's a positive outcome in terms of reassessing how much we're pushing our kids, because they're struggling and they're asking for help. And unfortunately, as a college consultant, guiding the family and the kids,
Mhm.
I have to put them in the best position to be a competitive student for a given university. So
Yeah,
I can't, because the demands are set forth by the university. So we
right.
have to always live up to that expectation. Therefore, we have to plan earlier. We have to have a game plan. We have to have a
Sure.
strategy my job is to create and advocate for a student and present a competitive candidate for a university.
Yeah, but that
So
bar keeps getting raised higher and higher. It's almost nowadays like, to get into college, you might need a PhD because of all the stuff kids are doing. You know what I mean? And maybe the colleges have to say, hey, what extra things do these kids really get out of these extracurricular if they're kind of forcing themselves to do it as opposed to enjoying the process of doing it,
Well, let me maybe qualify that in a way that's better. So colleges are very keen or are very wise in understanding whether students do things in order to check a box, or whether they do that because they have a passion in an area that they want to develop. So if the latter is the case, those are the students that are highly coveted by colleges. So
Mhm.
you don't want to have 30 things that you're doing, like
Sure.
playing the piano, playing the violin, going playing soccer,
Yeah,
singing.
yeah,
A lot of kids a lot of parents put their kids in many different things, not understanding that that's not what universities are looking for. There is a formula for this, Dr. Jack. The formula is persistence over time.
right.
So it's how you persist in a specific activity
Right.
in which you have a passion for, and the duration, right? So you don't want to, if you, for example, let's talk about kids wanting to go to study medicine, pre-med, right?
Mm,
So kids can volunteer at a hospital legally when they're 16 years of age.
mm,
So if
yeah.
a student wants to participate, if the student wants to major in biology, let's say at a research university like UCLA, then I advise that student to start volunteering at a hospital and doing job shadowing from 16 years of age. because that's a given. You can't do anything minimal, less than that, if you want to be taken seriously by a university like, let's say, the caliber of a UCLA. So I don't know if that kind of addresses the
Yeah,
question in a roundabout
I'm
way.
still like, I'm still a little bit unsure of why the university, and again, we're going a little bit off topic, but I think this is something that has bothered me personally, because as an administrator, looking at a kid volunteering at a hospital at age 16, having gone through med school and grad school, that tells me absolutely nothing about what that kid is going to want to do during college and whether they're going to want to go to medical school later on. That doesn't tell me anything about the potential of that kid to even be a doctor, right? They're just doing what? Like pushing people around, or what experience are they getting? So for me to use something like that as a way to gauge, should I accept this student to be a biology major? I don't know, what does that tell you about the student? And yeah, you can make these kids do stuff and use it as a way to gauge their passion or something, but they're too young. Their mind still hasn't set in. They'll pick something, and God knows, you know better than I do, that most undergrad change their major 5, 6, 8 times. I don't know what the number is now.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a word on the street that organic chemistry is the class that differentiates real med students from pretenders. Is that so?
Exactly, it totally is. But guess what? How much organic chemistry do you use in med school? Zero, right? And
Oh,
there
well,
is no organic chemistry. And understanding, yeah, biochemistry and stuff, base understanding, but it's a weeding out thing, right?
right.
And so that's the other thing. Are we teaching and empowering kids to be trained in something that they're eventually going to become masters on? Or are we just throwing this stuff at them just to be able to see who could dodge it and be able to get through the maze and finally end up wherever they wanted to end up in?
Uh, right. But, there's also, kids have to write an essay, right? They have to write a personal statement based on some experiences that they've had.
Mhm.
So part of the philosophy behind that is how well do they show demonstrate that they're passionate about being a biology major. And
Well, come on, but what does a 16-year-old know anything about their passion for biology? You know what I mean? Like, they could have interest in science and stuff, but how do you demonstrate that besides the fact that you're learning the classes, you're engaging yourself in the curricula, and yeah, if you
well,
want to do research, great, but do we really need that? Be pushed
well,
on kids, especially in the pandemic era, where some of these things you can't do these extracurricular
right,
stuff that you
right,
were mentioning. So how do you demonstrate your passion besides saying, dude, I really love this topic?
right. Um, well, taking the theory, which is the course, learning about the concepts, is in your passion. You can say that you're passionate about it, and you
Mhm.
love to study biology. You love to study physiology, human anatomy, whatever it is. But the philosophy behind that is, do you have any practical? Has that been kind of implemented? Have you gone and actually observed the doctor or a nurse, or have you been in a hospital setting? And it's not really negative. I'll add that, because this is an early opportunity for a kid to go to a hospital and say, wow, is this something where I would want to be in? Is this something that I see myself
Yeah.
doing in a few years? Do I do
See,
I
that I agree with. What the
Yeah,
student gains out of it, I think it's important. It also teaches them about responsibility and what it means to be at certain
sure,
place at a
right.
certain time. Those are all great. I completely agree. It teaches kids about, um, self-determination and all of these things. But what I'm saying is, from the college admissions point of view,
Yeah.
should I be assessing the kid's ability to do something like that rather than, just say, hey, do what you want. We're not going to be directly judging you.
Right. Um, well, I mean, it's what's going on in the field of higher ed. So if you have, let's say, 10 kids that are okay, we're going to make the scale very minutiae, right? At UCLA, you have 100,000 kids that apply plus every year, and you're talking about 100,000 of the brightest minds in the country. Now,
Right.
if we would scale that down to 10 kids, and you have 10 kids that are marking that they want to be pre-med, right? They want to study biology at UCLA. And then you look at you look at their resume, you look at their activities list, and you look at their extracurricular experiences. And then from these 10, 5 of them say that they've gone to a hospital, they've spent 4 hours a week for the last 2.5 years because they're passionate about it. And then you have 5
Or
of
their
those kids,
counselor told them that these checkboxes need to be done, right?
or they had a very wise and smart counselor who
Yeah, right.
was helping them,
And
guiding them.
if they don't have one, you know where you get one, right? If you watch this episode.
Well, I hope this is going to go out to the families, and they're going to know that, that there is a good company that
Well,
can help them.
so you know, I mean, this whole education system is awesome, and I hope to one day continue having these conversations with you, because I'm kind of passionate about teaching myself. But going towards, the pandemic, I know this is something we all want to kind of not think about, but it's here, it's a reality. So you work with a lot of these students, and you said you've seen some level of anxiety. In your experience, how would that affect their learning? I know from a medical perspective, but I'm trying to see it from the educator's point of view. Like, if there is higher level of basal anxiety because of this, and now they have to take standardized tests, which is the last thing you want to be doing. How would we go about addressing these issues? Are there more counselors being hired to help with the mental health issues with kids during this? Are there measures
Yes,
to address?
that's a good question. So, a lot of schools have, school districts have psychologists, public school districts. Um, our school, being a private school this year, we had a center called the Wellness Center, and where mental health practitioners would come to do their clinical hours, but they would also work with students, who were facing social emotional challenges. So you see, now you see the expansion of such. I think you're going to see more of an expansion, more of a need. Um, uh, as a matter of fact, my role also encompasses social emotional. I do address stress. I do address emotional issues to a certain extent. I mean, if it's too much, then we do refer out to experts. But to answer your question, I foresee there being a growth, or there being more, therapy or therapists that are working in conjunction with schools in order to serve students. Because again, what I've seen so far from the 3 months of data that we have is definitely an increased level of complaints, increased level of cases, let's say, increased level of anecdotal data indicating that students are having social emotional difficulties and challenges due to the closures and due to the circumstances arising from the pandemic and the closures.
In relation to that, what do we do with special ed students that homeschooling isn't going to work? I mean, you need these kids to be under specific, teachers. So what's going to happen with them?
Yes, it's so I have spoken to at least one special education teacher, and they're non-negotiable, right? They have to be there with the students,
Right.
because given the nature of the job that they perform, and they are telling me that they're going to go back because those classes are smaller, as you know, than your regular class.
Right.
There are only there are only a few students in those classes. So my expectation is that there's going to be social distancing. Teachers
Mhm.
are going to wear a mask.
Mhm.
They're going to stagger the breaks in terms of recess and lunch. But yeah, that's uh, I I don't see them being cut. There's not going to be a reduction in those services to special education students.
I'm
But
glad.
they're just going to follow the protocols in terms of the guideline, the social distancing and all those things.
And are there any um, like statewide or federal, I don't know of any, but are there any money investments being done to schooling and education system directly to kind of help start processes of like if someplace people need computers or whatever and they need to buy it or I mean some teachers only learn now what an internet is or what Zoom is. Are there any
Right.
um, the older generation teachers uh, are they educating the educators to this new wave of potential learning so that they could be up to date when when schools potentially open up?
Yes, absolutely. So I can speak firsthand as a parent. I have a son who's 10 years old. Uh, the teacher, there were regular professional development occurring for instructors, from the IT department in the district. So there's definitely professional development taking place because you have a lot of teachers that are seniors,
Mhm.
that they haven't used
Sure.
technology, they don't know how to navigate, or it's very difficult for them. Um,
Um,
so there's all that going on, and I will say this, that I'm noticing that there's definitely a negative impact on older teachers in terms of
mhm.
their ability. They're being crippled by their lack of um, you know the speed by which they're catching
Required.
up to the technology.
Sure.
And you know what else, Dr. Jack, I've noticed is that a lot of older teachers are retiring. They're not going back because of their concern.
Makes
I,
sense.
I know of colleagues that are not going to come back in the fall. They've chosen to retire,
It's
who've been
completely
teaching for
reasonable for them to feel that way.
30 and 40 years. So, anyone, when they're above 65 years of age, these particular people that I'm thinking of above 65 years of age,
Um,
I think there's a real fear that exists, and it's
Legitimate.
causing people to not go back.
So I know we could continue this forever. I mean, I really
This is
enjoyed this
enjoyable,
discussion.
by the way. I love this. All we're missing is some nice coffee and some music in the background, and I think we could
So
go for hours.
um, and we're doing it in a socially responsible way.
Right.
Outside of everything we've discussed, what are your top two problems, short term and long term, that you could think of? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know we've discussed a lot. Are there things that you think we've missed and that was like, there's these two things we didn't talk about?
Yes. So my problem, my challenge is having access to my students,
Mhm.
physical access. So I don't know how I can regain that because everything is online right now. So that's a challenge for me, to not be able to sit close to my students when I'm consulting or working with them. Um,
That's
that,
important.
that's to me that's important. I mean, we can do this all day long, but
Mhm.
to have that human touch and
Mhm.
the nearness to another human being,
Right.
I can't have that same emotional impact. I can't have that same
Uh-huh.
affect on them. I can't be that encourager to them
Sure.
and that counselor for them from behind the screen, at a distance. So that's one concern that I have. And another concern, we don't know what's going to happen to public schools. Right now I'm hearing figures of 20 to 30% reduction in public school attendance.
Wow.
So those are big numbers. So a lot of parents have been contacting me, as a matter of fact, asking me, please tell me my homeschool option. I don't feel comfortable sending my student back to school coming up in the fall.
Mhm.
So navigating that is difficult, you know, because we have so many, like, we don't know how things are going to look like.
Right.
And then parents have a higher level of anxiety because of the unknowns. And for me to advise them not knowing how things are going to happen is another challenge that I personally have.
It's sort of like where physicians were 3 months ago about not knowing what is happening, what we're supposed to be doing. I mean, not that we've learned it completely, but at least some level of information
Mhm.
has come out since then. So that level of anxiety of guiding patients and stuff is much better. But I guess the education um, arm right now is in that same scenario where you got no information, nothing to tell you which way to navigate,
Mhm.
and it's challenging because we're think. I mean, this is the future, right? And these are the future leaders of America, and you know the education that they're getting, the experiences are going to impact her long term. So it's
Right.
important. Um, and I, as much as it is difficult to be an adult at this point in time with everything going on, I think it really is a 10 times worse to be a kid in those transition years right now. And like we said in the beginning of the show, missing graduation, missing prom, missing all of these things. These are the things that I even look back on with some of my friends to kind of
Mhm.
reminisce those good times
Right.
and be able to make those connections. And when we're taking those away from kids, and
Unf-
hopefully
Yeah.
we'll find ways to replace those in some way. But
If I can just state to your audience, you know, what we do, what I personally do is to provide a support for families. Um, so families that are confused, families that need guidance on how to navigate these difficult times. That's what we do. That's what my company does. And you know, with the teacher, you know, with the parents being now the primary teachers at home, you know, a lot of them have challenges in terms of providing content area expertise. You know, not everybody, you know, knows is remembers the math that they took, you know, decades ago or
or
years
the new
ago,
kind of
or
math, man.
science,
I mean, I've done a
or a lot of
PhD.
the updates in science, right? So what we offer to K through 12 students is that professional support to come alongside parents, so they feel that they have someone that can support them in the process. And you know, my company Eduprosusa does that, provides that professional care.
So I'll definitely put the link in this part of the video, but I also put it in the description of the video when I upload it, that they could contact you if they need any kind of support. I mean, this is the time to start kind of thinking about it, get yourself prepared before you don't want to leave it the last day like kids do with their homeworks, right? So they got to be
and and
prepared.
and we're also here, just to add on that, we are also here for students in college and students who want to go to graduate school, or they want to go to professional school like medical school, or they want to go to law school. So our company has professionals at the highest caliber to enable to help students navigate the various professional uh, trajectories that they have. You know, so
Mhm.
we want to give students support. We want them to have a resource. We want them to have assistance. You know, and fortunately, we're fortunate enough and grateful to be in, you know, serve that niche of assisting
That's
families
wonderful.
and students. Yeah. So
I mean, you know, your company and the things that you're doing is in prime position to, you know, be the safety net for at all levels of education and different stages of these students. And they're all stressful. It never gets easy. So,
mm,
and I applaud you for having the forethought and the foresight to be able to create something like this for for these students. So
Thank you. I have a
thank you.
question for you, Dr. Jack, if it's
Yes.
okay. You can ask. What is your medical or scientific foresight, I guess you can say? Are you guys going to allow us to, or are we going to go back to normal? Do you foresee a future from 3 to 6 months that we can function close to what we were functioning as before March?
So that's kind of a loaded question because it involves multiple moving parts that we're waiting for answers, right? One
Okay.
of them is definitely the vaccine development, because without a vaccine, it'll be really hard to remove these recommendations, because we're going to have ebbs and flows of uh, infections popping up and mini epidemics going on. It's inevitable. So our only permanent solution to want to be able to go back to the pre-COVID era would be the development of a vaccine. There are multiple companies working really, really hard to expedite this process.
Hmm.
And this is happening at laser. I mean, it's the fastest I've seen, and you know, people think it's slow because outside of the medical and scientific community, anything that doesn't happen faster than a click of the mouse is slow, right?
Hmm.
But these developments are actually happening at lightning speed. Which one is going to pan out? It's hard to gauge, but with so many different strategies being pursued, the bet is that one of them will work, right? And the other issue with that is once you have the vaccine, how do you manufacture at a? We're going to need to vaccinate billions of people, right? At least hundreds of millions of people. How do you scale up that manufacturing? Because you could have a vaccine that works great, but if it takes 10 days to make one vial of that, is that practical, right? It's
Right.
not. So large scale development is an issue. The other big issue is how do you distribute this to, or let's say in America, to 200 to 300 million people, right? The distribution. So with all of these steps requiring thinking and time to get answers, realistically speaking, I think 3 to 6 months, we could assume that we're going to be living the way we are right now. So I'm thinking more 8 to 12 months before we can start feeling comfortable that vaccine will be there, right? Now, without the vaccine, it'll we're going to sort of allow the virus to kind of run through the population in some ways with the social distancing and all of these measures happening, right? Until we reach a level of herd immunity where um, the virus is kind of living with us just like, you know, other kinds of viruses that we generally live with just fine. But at what cost in terms of human life? That's going to depend on our social restrictions that people either follow or don't follow. So these are the options. And in terms of drugs, because if at least we had some therapeutic drugs, we could say, hey, you know, we don't have a vaccine, but at least when people get sick, we got something to help them. Those haven't panned out, at least to my liking, in terms of their efficacy. So could something really pan out tomorrow that we didn't know about because the company was quiet about it and all of a sudden they have these great results? Absolutely. But given what I know, what the data is right now, realistically speaking, let's not go into the hypotheticals. There's nothing there that's effective, right? So can we go back to pre-COVID era? For sure, once we have a vaccine and it's effective and we could distribute them fast enough to be able to do it.
And just a quick follow-up to that, because it's relevant to my field, education. Do you think this is something that's going to be required for students to have in order to go to school?
That's a that's a big question, because this goes into the whole idea of vaccines in general. Should
Right.
vaccines be required? I'm more of a this is also a political issue and a kind of a personal like civil right, not civil, but like
Personal right.
individual rights issue, right? Should it be required? I think it should be really required, but should you be forcing it onto people and say, hey, if you don't have it, you can't go? I think Um, I'm not for that. I know there are people, my colleagues, who might disagree with me, but I can't allow the law to get to that level where it forces an individual to inject something into their body because the government says so. That's just a personal sort of opinion of mine. But is it important that people are encouraged to do the vaccine? Absolutely. So for me, the way I think about it is it shouldn't be required because people are going to do it anyway. That's my way of thinking about
Ah,
it.
okay, right.
You get what I mean? Like, we shouldn't
Yeah.
have to require it because everybody's going to do it, you know?
And which one is a better strategy? Is the herd immunity strategy better, or the vaccine strategy better, in your opinion?
Well, if the vaccine works, vaccine will save a lot of lives.
Okay.
And herd strategy, we saw what happened with herd strategy during the Spanish flu of 1918. It worked because there were no medications and vaccines, of course. I'm being facetious, but it wiped out a lot of people, right? So, and we're seeing what happened with Sweden. They weren't very successful. And in fact, the epidemiologist that proposed that just came out saying, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Yes, we might get herd immunity faster, but at what level of death are we going to be okay with, right? And in America, it's important because we have a sick population in terms of our comorbidities, the rampant heart problems, diabetes, obesity, right? And so if we allow the virus to kind of run its course, we're going to see higher levels of of mortality. And I don't think anybody's okay with that. At least that's my feel, that people shouldn't be okay with people dying, right? And if there's ways
Right.
to prevent that, we have to do it. And those costs need to be kind of weighed in with the other issues like education we've been discussing all day. So for me, absolutely having the vaccine, making it work. And again, people are, I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of say that the vaccine doesn't have to work 100%. In other words, we don't have to have a vaccine that prevents you from getting coronavirus. But if it's a virus, if it's a vaccine that makes you um, in a way where if you get the virus, you're a little bit sick, but you're not going to die from it. You might have the sniffles or feel a little bit under the weather for a few days and then recover. That's also great, right? Because it's fine. Just like, the flu vaccine, some years, like, yeah, even if you have the vaccine, you could get the flu, but not feel horrible about it. So if it's at least somewhat efficacious, then that's also a huge win for us. So,
Right.
well,
Sounds good.
Daniel, this has been fabulous. Enjoyed it, and maybe you could come back later with some updates about what's going on, and we can also have a discussion, a philosophical one in general about education, and regardless of the pandemic, where we see education going, in the long term with all of this online stuff happening. Maybe there's a revolution in education, and we're just part of that, and we're in the beginnings of it. So I really
Absolutely.
appreciate your time, and you've been wonderful. And I know the viewers are going to learn a lot from listening to you. And I'll be sharing your website, and that way they can reach out and contact you for if they have any questions.
Sure, sure. I just wanted to thank you again, Dr. Jack, for this opportunity to share. With my finger being on the pulse on a regular basis, I hope it's productive, it's useful for your audience, and anytime you let me know, man, I would love to spend time with you. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful night, Daniel, and take care and be safe. And thank you for all that you do with the future leaders of America. So, with that, have a good night.
Good night. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.